say a little bit about them. The speaker series is co-sponsored by the Maryland Climate Coalition. And tonight we've actually coordinated with another organization called Interfaith Power and Light, because this weekend, starting tomorrow actually, is Interfaith Power and Light sponsored action across Maryland. It's called Climate in the Pulpits Weekend. And they asked if we would schedule this at the beginning. So this is probably the initial event of the Climate in the Pulpits Weekend. And as I say, will unfold all across
This is Maryland.
Starting tomorrow. So there'll be ministers and rabbis and priests and imams all talking about climate change this weekend. So we have 3 speakers tonight, and let me introduce them. I saw Brooke. Oh,
Come over here,
Brooke. Yeah, come on in, Brooke. So this is Brooke Harper. Brooke is the Maryland DC Policy Director for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And she also chairs the Environmental Justice Committee on the Maryland State Chapter of the NAACP. At CCAN, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Brooke has spearheaded field efforts to expand Maryland's renewable portfolio standard and to ban fracking. Thank you for that. In her free time, she enjoys the great outdoors and can be found hiking, tubing, and camping in Western Maryland, where she was born. She's also a member, I didn't know this until I found this today on the CCAN website. She's also a member of the Mason-Dixon Roller Vixens, a roller derby team where she skates under the nickname of Dirty Politics.
I think I'm gonna stay
So this evening, Brooke will be talking with us about how TransCanada, the same company that was behind the Keystone XL pipeline, is proposing to build the Potomac pipeline, which would transport fracked gas under the Potomac River and the C&O Canal, and about how we can get involved in that issue. Moving on, Jamie DeMarco is on this side of the table. Jamie's a campaign co-manager for the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative. A native of Baltimore, he holds a BS degree in chemistry and environmental studies from Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina. Prior to his current position, Jamie also worked for CCAN, where he was a field organizer for renewable energy, and at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, where he lobbied for nuclear disarmament and reductions in Pentagon spending. Tonight, Jamie will talk about the newly formed Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative and that organization's campaign to enact legislation to ensure that 50% of Maryland's electricity comes from renewable sources by the year 2030. And then in the middle at the table is Vinny, better known as Vinny DeMarco. He is the board chair of the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative and president also of the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative. Vinny's skills in advocating for public health policies in Maryland are highly regarded, and he's the subject of a book titled The DeMarco Factor: Transforming Public Will into Political Power. For an overview of any successful approach to political action, check out the mission statement on the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative website and see the 6-step process that is the essence of the DeMarco Factor. As you might know already, Vinny is Jamie's father.
Right.
And several years ago, after I had been hearing about Jamie's good work on climate change, I was fortunate to have lunch with Vinny, and I asked him at that time if he'd be joining Jamie's efforts. He replied, "I'd love to, but I don't have the bandwidth." That has changed, and we look forward tonight to hearing how Vinny plans to apply his proven political organizing skills to climate change policy making. So let's welcome our speakers. And I think the order is for Brooke to go first. Is that
Okay.
right?
Sure.
All right.
So I did not have time to prepare a PowerPoint presentation because this one kicks me out. But I did want to speak with all of you about the Eastern Panhandle Expansion Project, and thank you for the opportunity to do so. Last year, Mountaineer Gas began surveying land in West Virginia, and it started to target landowners along the route in Berkeley County, West Virginia, which, for those of you that don't know, borders really closely to Maryland. And many of the landowners were unaware of what they were doing, why they were surveying, and why they wanted these easements. And it was actually for a proposed frack gas pipeline that's going to run from Bedford County, Pennsylvania. It's going to cut through Hancock, underneath the Potomac River, and then transport natural gas over to Berkeley County, West Virginia. And this is one of those unique campaigns, not one that we originated. It really was a homespun grassroots movement started by the Eastern Panhandle Protectors and a group of concerned citizens that began to meet in West Virginia about the proposed pipeline. And since then, all during the fracking campaign, I was getting emails saying, "What are you going to do about the pipeline?" I was like, "I can't even think about that right now." And so, but finally, since we've been fracking successfully in Maryland, thanks to many advocates like yourself building a strong grassroots movement, we now have the capacity to work on the pipeline as well. And so when we first started looking at this campaign, one of the things I did was research how New York had stopped the Atlantic and the Constitution pipelines. And what we found was that concentrated media pressure in the local areas where the proposed pipeline was going to be built really was what turned the tide on that campaign, as well as painting Governor Cuomo as the primary target and the primary person that had the power to stop it. And they did stop it with their 401 certification. And in Maryland, we also have a similar process. Many states, if a pipeline is crossing underneath a body of water, they have the right to deny or waive their right or approve what they call a 401 water certification. So after FERC hands down their approval, it gets punted back down to the states. And the states actually have a lot more power than they usually think they do, and can actually stop the pipeline. And so our goal right now is to pressure Governor Hogan to do the same. This is a pipeline that doesn't serve any general purpose for Maryland. We're not going to get the frack gas, we're not going to benefit from it. But what we are going to get is potential harms and risks to our water. The Potomac River is a drinking source for over 6 million residents in Maryland and the DC metro area. And so we've had a lot of organizing that we did this summer around the proposed pipeline. We started what we've done the rolling encampment. It's not a real term, it's just something I made up. Campaign, and each weekend different organizations camped out along the route of the pipeline and along the C&O Canal to show their objection to the pipeline, and that helped to garner media attention in the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun and really start to put this pipeline on the map. In fact, I just went to West Virginia last Thursday, and they had a copy of the Shepherdstown paper, The Observer, and the whole front page was pipeline, yes or no. And so this really has been a grassroots movement that's sprung up. We've had the support of many legislators across Maryland. Delegate Platt authored a letter to Governor Hogan with over 20 legislators that came in and spoke out and asked him to deny the 401 water certification, together with the Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, and a host of other organizations who were able to generate over 10,000 comments to FERC, asking them to really consider the area that they're trying to put the pipeline through. One of the things that we're most concerned about is it traverses an area where we have what we call karst geology. And so think of karst geology like Swiss cheese. So it's really porous and there's a lot of holes in it. And so if you're putting a pipeline through that type of geology, it just makes the harm factor rise up even more if there was a leak. And we've seen leaks where they've done horizontal drilling of this type in Ohio and in other places. And we worked really, really hard to ban fracking in Maryland. And we don't want to be at risk of a frack gas pipeline and still have the impacts there. There's a couple of events and a couple of efforts that we're working on now. One of the things that was really successful during our fracking campaign was passing local resolutions. Unfortunately, in West Virginia, from the governor on down to your local city council person, they've signed on in support of this pipeline, with the exception of a few municipalities. And so one of the municipalities we're targeting right now is Shepherdstown. We had a town hall meeting with a person from the Jefferson County Economic Development Authority, which is another county in West Virginia, which the pipeline will go through, with representation from the Eastern Panhandle Protectors as well as the Potomac River Keepers. And what they were, it was really well attended. We had over 75 folks there, media coverage there. So they're really starting to put the campaign on the map. And they spoke about what are the potential harms. And we were able to hear about the concerns from mothers of 2 children who the pipeline is going to be running right a few feet from their home. And what does that mean for their drinking water? And from one of the things that the Economic Development Authority was trying to say, give the reasoning for was, West Virginia needs this natural gas, and so many businesses don't come to West Virginia and don't come to our county because we don't have access to natural gas, and Jefferson County needs this. And the funny thing was they couldn't name one business that didn't settle there because they didn't have access to natural gas. When they did file their certificate of need, one of the things that they're saying is that they do need this pipeline in order to supply a new Procter & Gamble plant that's going to be built in Martinsburg. But at first there was no need. And so I think it's a manufactured need that puts the risk of not only our drinking water, but the other folks in West Virginia and their environment at risk. On October 14th, if you all want to make a long drive, I make long drives to here all the time. Please join us. We'll be doing a Hands Across the Potomac event. We'll be stretching across the James Rumsey Bridge that connects Sharpsburg, Maryland, and Shepherdstown, West Virginia, to really show that Marylanders and West Virginians are united together to stop this pipeline. Another thing that you can do is call Governor Hogan and ask him to deny the 401 water certification. During the legislative session, we've been looking at what are different vehicles that we can use to draw attention to this issue. And some proposals that we have on the table are, one, are doing a rally in Annapolis to stop the pipeline and really start to put the pressure on Governor Hogan. And the second one would be a legislative vehicle to look at regulations around drilling through karst geology so that we can stop incidents like this and stop the increased danger to our water sources.
Could you spell karst?
K-A-R-S-T. And I have some fact sheets for you all. If you want, please go on. There's our website at the bottom. And so please go on and sign the petition to Governor Hogan, or make a phone call. And what we're asking him to do, again, is to deny the 401 water certification that's needed to go through. We have met with Secretary Grumbles and also his water quality certification folks. They hadn't read all of the information yet. Mountaineer Gas they're going to be doing the project in West Virginia. And then TransCanada, whom we're all familiar with, is going to be the company that will run the pipeline underneath through Hancock, underneath the Potomac River, and then to Pennsylvania. So we know that if we stop the pipeline in Maryland, we can stop the project from going forward. And I do just want to leave you all with this thought, pipelines do impact communities. And one of the things that I carry with me in this campaign is a woman named Patricia Kiesecker. And she has farmed her land for about 7 generations. And well, she's had her family's land in her family for about 7 generations. And the day that we launched our rolling encampment on June 30th was also the day that they lost their eminent domain case against Mountaineer Gas. And one of the things is when pipelines run through your property is that you can't quite farm your land because there's a lot of restrictions on what kind of equipment you can run, what kind of activity that you can do around it. And so they're a family that's struggling in poverty, and this is what they have. This is all they have. They live on a trailer on the farm, and this land is what they have. And so I hope that you can join us in Sharpsburg on October 14th. If not, pick up the phone, call Governor Hogan. There's no reason why we should put Marylanders at risk. There's no reason why our neighbors in West Virginia should be at risk and bullied off of their land and have their land taken. And there's no reason to risk our water when we can be transitioning to clean energy sources. Please pay attention to this presentation that's following us, because I really do believe that, we'll have to fight a lot less of these fights as we transition to wind and solar, and there won't be a lot more Patricia Keysuckers. There won't be mothers worrying about, is the pipeline going to contaminate their water, if we really work for clean energy solutions. So I'm going to pass these out, and if y'all have any questions, feel free to
Yeah.
Are we
ask
doing
questions.
questions now?
Yeah, let's do
Or sorry.
questions with Brooke.
Later.
Yeah.
I have, two.
Sure.
One is, around, the 401, whatever that thing is.
Water certification.
And I guess it's about, how long do we have? You know what I'm saying? It took, 6 years or whatever for the fracking ban. How long do we have for this thing since the commit was actually
We
pulled?
have about a year for the project. Right now, TransCanada sent in an incomplete application to MDE. So MDE has made a request for them to complete their application for consideration. The Department of Natural Resources, looking at all of the impaired streams that have crossed. In Maryland, the pipeline would cross over through 8 impaired streams and waterways. And then, so they've written a report saying, please look at this more carefully and wait 7 to 8 months so that we can get an ample study and see what all of the environmental impacts would be of this pipeline. At the time that we met with Brumble staff, they hadn't even looked at the report. So we don't know if that's being taken into consideration. Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and others have all submitted a letter to Grumbles citing our concerns, asking them to please review the DNR report. And we haven't heard any follow-up since. When we did our last action, we did a paddle against the pipeline and also a tour of Crystal Grottos for legislators. And Crystal Grottos is this little cavern in Boonesboro that they actually discovered while they were mining for limestone. And they discovered this grand cavern. But it really showcases the karst geology, so we wanted to give an opportunity for our legislators to say, this is what you're trying to propose putting a pipeline through. And so after that, we started to hear from like Senator Madaleno and others that their lobbyists, so TransCanada, Mountaineer Gas's lobbyists, have started to approach our legislators. They don't have the authority to say yay or nay to this pipeline, but I'm guessing since we're raising the profile of this campaign with our grassroots movement, that they're now becoming concerned. So I would look for this to, if we don't succeed, to come online in about a year.
So second is, I'm a little confused as to, does this mean a third pipeline going through Virginia?
So they
You
would.
know, I mean,
No, so the pipeline starts in Pennsylvania. It crosses through, what they're trying to do is just do it the shortest and cheapest route that they can, which is through Maryland, to cut it through Maryland. So the connector, Pennsylvania has a pipeline that they're already started construction on. Then the TransCanada pipeline would run from Hancock, Maryland, underneath the Potomac River and connect to the Mountaineer Gas pipeline in West Virginia. And one of the things that they didn't look at when they looked at the application for the West Virginia permit was that this was a pipeline to nowhere unless it had this connection. And so they didn't look at what's gonna be the overall environmental impacts. They just looked at what's gonna be the, impacts to West Virginia and didn't consider the project in all of its completion. And we know with pipelines, you have to find a way to transport that gas and to change its form. And so more compressor stations are going to come online, and they haven't said that, and normally they don't, when they're putting their projects forward, but we know that's what comes online as we see more pipelines coming on board.
So
Go ahead.
you're up.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, so if Governor Hogan did reject the 401 certification, would that be enough to completely stop the pipeline, or would it,
Yes,
there's no way they could rebuild it from the path?
they could reroute it. Our unified message, because we don't wanna say not in my backyard, is that we don't want them to reroute it. We want them to keep it in the ground, and it would make the project much more expensive if they had to reroute it instead of going under the Potomac.
So is the ban just on this one or any pipeline?
This one.
Okay.
So
West
Ted,
Virginia gets gas now.
Mhm.
Where do they get that?
Pennsylvania. And
From where?
From Pennsylvania, and they have frac gas in West Virginia as well.
For their pipelines, if we think back as a network of infrastructure of pipelines throughout the country, I'm guessing, right?
Mhm.
So there's no way for them to tap into that network.
That is what they're trying to do through this pipeline, is tap into that network and provide natural gas. Right now, they don't have a natural gas supplier to Jefferson County. So they're looking at that as a way, they're looking at this as a vehicle to get that. And one of the things that the company did was they also promised the residents, yes, we will retrofit your appliances if you allow for an easement. They've since reneged on that, so it's not even benefiting the community anymore either.
Are the pipelines throughout the country above ground or below ground?
Below. And so there are other, just before you ask, there are other pipelines underneath the Potomac, but this is the only one that's going to be drilled through that sensitive karst geology.
Chloe?
Most of my questions have already been answered. The one remaining is, how many miles are we talking about? Because we often hear pipelines measured in miles.
So the portion that would cut underneath the Potomac would be 3 miles long.
I just want to add something about karst geology, because I was in a caving club in college. This headline on your sheet that says dangerous karst geology. It's only dangerous if you put a pipeline there. Otherwise, it's beautiful, gorgeous.
All right. Yes,
I
Wes.
do have one area of question. I understand your arguments against, but of course, the arguments that the governor is going to be considering are pretty much economic in nature, and how many potential jobs this will create for Marylanders, and also what is the economic benefit that he will be looking at.
It
Is there a
doesn't
study
serve
of
an
the
economic
relative-
benefit for Maryland.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't serve an economic benefit for Maryland
At all.
at all.
So why is this a hard decision at all?
Good question. I don't think we've raised, literally, we just needed to raise the profile of this campaign. Like, I found it shocking when we went to MDE and we knew more about the pipeline than they did. And hadn't really thoroughly reviewed the application or the other concerns. But we also know that we're in an administration that has cut half of their staff and their resources. And so they're probably overworked and overburdened too. And a lot of people just didn't know about the pipeline. A lot of people still don't know about it. And so we're really trying to change that through presentations like these and through the rolling encampment and other grassroots advocacy.
So should it be approved? Should Governor Hogan elect to sign this certification? There's going to be zero benefit for Maryland.
No.
I'm stymied.
Okay, if any other questions occur, we'll have another opportunity to ask Brooke at the end, but let's turn to, and I'm not sure who first. Who wants to go first?
After you, Tom.
That's good.
Age before beauty, right? Thank you very much. I'm Vinny DeMarco. I'm the board chair of the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative. I'm also the president of the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative, and it's a pleasure to be here, sitting next to my son and Brooke Harper, two wonderful people who helped stop fracking by going to jail. Jamie over my objections. Brooke sweet talked my son and wife into going to jail. And,
They wanted to.
they wanted to, yes. I will blame you. But it got tremendous attention.
A
and
mother-son
helped.
bonding.
Yes, mother-son.
No, they were in separate cells.
But I fed them dinner when they got out. I participated. But Brooke is terrific, and Maryland is really lucky to have her leading the fight like the ban on fracking, which was not easy, and I'm honored to be working with her on this issue. My history is 30 years of working on public health issues, and with a lot of help from the faith community. Can I ask, is everybody here from Annapolis Friends, or?
No.
No, okay.
The rest are friends of Annapolis Friends.
Friends of Annapolis, okay, but from this area, okay, all right, just clarifying. But this community and many communities across the state came together with us over the last few years to really make some tremendous progress on public health and healthcare in Maryland. And in order to do so, we had to beat some pretty formidable foes. And over the course of these years working on these issues, I've learned two very important lessons. And first is that no matter what cynicism is out there, there are policies that work. That for many, many public health problems, environmental problems, there are evidence-based policies that work. And the second thing I learned is that the vast majority of Marylanders, and I believe Americans, strongly support these policies, but not everybody. And there's a relatively small but loud minority that opposes all these things, and I run into them fairly often. In my own neighborhood in Northeast Baltimore City, I went many years ago to get their support for a gun violence prevention measure, and they endorsed it, which was great. And a few years later, I went back to ask that same group to support a increase in the cigarette tax. And this really big guy at the front of the audience got up and said, "Aren't you the guy who came after my guns? Now you're trying to take away my cigarettes. Next thing I know, you're coming after my ham." Well, I assured him we were going to leave his ham alone, but I didn't tell him I was a vegetarian because he probably would have shot me. But he was very upset. Luckily, the group endorsed us, and we had a significant victory. And people like that are across the state really upset about these policies, but they aren't the real reason a lot of these policies don't get enacted. They don't get enacted because of powerful vested interests who make money off of cigarette sales to kids, off of too much alcohol sales to kids, off of too many guns on the street. They just make a lot of money, and they have a lot of clout in Annapolis. And they were able to block a lot of the measures that we tried to enact over the years. But a group of us, really over the last 20, 25 years, put together a 6-step process, which has worked over and over again to defy conventional wisdom and defeat some of the most powerful vested interests in Annapolis. So that now, thanks to 3 cigarette tax increases, Maryland has one of the lowest smoking rates in the country. And we dropped smoking by 30% thanks to these tobacco tax increases, double the national average. We haven't stopped Brooke yet, but I'm still working on it. We have, I love this thing, but we have, we have really made substantial progress. Over 200,000 fewer smokers, 70,000 of them would have died horrible tobacco-caused death. And the money, yes, I'm digging it in, I'm digging it in. She's gonna quit in October. Brutal. And the money from that tax was used to expand healthcare to over 100,000 Marylanders, even before the Affordable Care Act, saving many people's lives that way, which made our motto, tobacco taxes save lives. We, the same way, increased the alcohol tax for the first time in 40 years. Many of you helped with that. And that caused a big drop in drunk driving deaths in Maryland, and believe it or not, in gonorrhea rates because of less bad sex decisions by kids. It really works. Alcohol tax increases save lives. These policies work. And over the years, we've honed it, we've made it work, and as Phil said, there's a book about it, DeMarco Factor, Transforming public will into political power. And we've also made a 2-minute video. You're ready to show that? Can we show a video?
We can. Can I pull it up on YouTube?
Do we have the ability? You promise?
We do.
I would like to show 2 videos, one about the 6-step process. I'll keep talking to you, Ray. And then further about the Clean Energy Jobs campaign. And this 6-step process, the core of it is building a powerful coalition and really reaching out to the public, ignoring the policymakers for a while, and really building a powerful coalition, then taking that powerful coalition and with it, forcing a lot of the elected officials to do something they wouldn't otherwise want to do because their people want them to do it. Are you saying you're ready? Or? Okay. Over the years, as I said, we've used this. We've used this template on many issues. And when I had lunch with Phil a couple years ago, he asked, he said, would I be willing to help use this same template on the climate environmental issue? And as he said, I definitely did not have the bandwidth to do it because in addition to my main job, which is on healthcare and continues to be on healthcare, I've done a lot of work on gun violence prevention. I was the head of Marylanders to prevent gun violence, and I could not do another thing. And then I read a biography of Steve Jobs, and that biography was very illuminating in many ways, but he said something that really stuck with me, and that is deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. And I really thought about that a lot and decided that, especially inspired by Jamie and Brooke and other people, I really wanted to get involved in the climate issue. I had to break away from something. And I decided to move off the gun issue. Luckily, 2 wonderful young, yes, I know. There's 2 wonderful young ladies, Jen Pauline Conis and Liz Bannock, have taken over Marylanders to prevent gun violence, and they're really great and they're wonderful. But I've now moved away from that so that I could really spend time on this issue. And I was a lot inspired by Jamie when he got involved with Brooke in enacting the 25% Clean Energy Jobs bill and hearing more and more about how important it is that states enact something like this. And that bill passed the General Assembly, which was great. And then to everybody's surprise, Governor Hogan vetoed it. So Jamie and I decided to ride our bikes across state. You might have heard about this. We rode our bikes from Ocean City to Garrett County, 400 miles with some beautiful mountains, and got some incredible press attention. We called it the Ride for the Override. And one of the highlights was Brooke Harper made us a 6 a.m. breakfast. 6 a.m. vegan breakfast in Hagerstown. That was really great. And that ride also inspired me to get involved deeply in this issue. So we decided together to create the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative. And the idea is to use this 6-step process to make clean energy, renewable energy a reality in Maryland from 25% to 50%. So are we ready? Okay, so I'm going to play 2 videos in a row here, and then Jamie and I will keep talking. The first is just a description of the 6 steps, and then a description of what the Clean Energy Jobs Initiative is. So let's roll.
While grassroots campaigns need to be strategic, they definitely don't need to reinvent the wheel.
While grassroots campaigns need to be strategic, they definitely don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a proven path for success already being used to transform public will into political power across the nation, and it's explained in the book, The DeMarco Factor. It's a multi-year process, but we can summarize the main points in under 2 minutes. Step 1. Create an evidence-based policy plan. This is where you work with local experts and grassroots organizations to develop a watertight, proven policy solution. Don't skip this step. This research sets you up for success throughout your campaign. Next, test the plan with a high-quality poll. If you're going to get groups and politicians to sign on to something, you'd better make sure it moves voters first. And don't skimp on polling. Reliable results from a respected firm get you the credibility you need. Now you're ready to build a coalition. Create a resolution for groups to endorse and work hard to get lots of important organizations signed on. Got your coalition? It's time to bring on the media. The more media, the better, because media coverage builds public support for your cause and motivates your supporters. The fifth step is to make your policy into an election issue. This is when you leverage your coalition's strength to make candidates for office endorse your resolution. Then, let the voters know which candidates have endorsed it and which have not. And lastly, go win in the legislature. Because your powerful coalition got the candidates for office to endorse your cause, you begin the next legislative session with the support of a strong number of legislators committed to get the job done. You've built a powerful grassroots movement and are in a prime position for your policy solution to pass. Ready to learn more? Visit healthcareforall.com/6steps.
Public health measures. Now we're going to play a video that talks about the new campaign.
Before you do, Vinny,
Yes?
this seems to have direct applicability to the recent announcement from Senators Warren and Sanders about health care for all. Is this in any way related to that?
That is a whole nother topic, which it's not. And I personally am not supportive of that, which I can.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I can go into a lot of detail, but let's start with this.
This is our state. This is our air and our water.
These are our people.
Technology.
In there.
Can you repeat the website that was at the end of the last?
Healthcareforall.com/6steps. And I mean, if you go to healthcareforall.com, you'll hear about all what we're doing on prescription drugs and ACA protection. But /6steps will take you right to this clip.
Who can recite the 6 steps? Other than Brooke.
I gotta learn how to undo all this.
Yes, Brooke and I do that.
That's why the, excuse me.
Should I keep talking or are we close? There you go.
This is Merlin.
This is our state.
This is our air and our water.
These are our people. We are beautiful.
But right now, this is what our energy looks like. The Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative is striving to make our energy work for the people and places of Maryland.
This campaign is advancing legislation that'll do 3 things.
Expand renewable energy in Maryland to 50%.
Fund clean energy businesses owned by women and people of color.
And provide renewable energy job training programs for our residents.
That's the goal. And here's how we're going to get there.
First, we're going to explain why this matters to Maryland families and recruit support.
Then we will take these solutions to elected officials in Maryland.
And make this vision a reality.
Turning public will into political power will require Marylanders across the state to step up.
This change will not happen without you.
Sign up, make some calls,
volunteer,
and contribute as much as you can. Your time and donations will make this possible.
Let's fight the catastrophic effects
of environmental racism,
carbon pollution,
and extreme health consequences caused by fossil fuel.
Together, we will make our politics powered by the people
and our state powered by the sun.
it was Jamie's older brother, Tony, who said early on to us, you need a video. And we do really enjoy that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie in a second, but I want to just say here, and Jamie will say again, how you all can help us. If you remember those 6 steps, we're really focused now on step 3, which is building the powerful coalition. And in this packet that you have is the document we are asking groups to sign.
On the back.
On the back is the document we're asking groups to sign, a list of the over 330 groups that are presently on it. And we would love your help immediately, and certainly by January 1, to get any organization to which you belong to sign it. Annapolis Friends, Annapolis Unitarian, every congregation, organization, certainly want Climate Stewards to sign on. We have identified several districts that are critical to the success, and one of them is your own District 30. For a couple of reasons. One, Mike Bush is here, Speaker of the House, very, very important. And you're going to have a marquee Senate race next year. Senator John Askell retiring, and that major battle to replace him. And we can get the bill passed next year. Senator John Askell is on the key finance committee. So any way you look at it, this is a critical district. So Jamie will be nudging you constantly to make sure that every organization to which you belong signs this document, goes through the process and signs it. Is anybody here connected to St. Anne's Church? St. Anne's Episcopal? We would really love to get St. Anne's Episcopal signed on because of where they're located on Church Circle. And when we did the alcohol tax campaign, they were an initial supporter, and they had this beautiful press conference with faith leaders and community leaders right in St. Anne's Church where the media came, and it was very, very successful. So long and short, number one thing you all could do is make sure every organization that you're connected to in this area endorses this resolution. Number 2, as you heard Bishop Sutton say, we need contributions. And these are non-tax deductible contributions, because this is advocacy. And there's an easy way to do that, cleanenergyjobs.org/donate. And you can go right on there and make contributions. Those are the 2 ways you can help. I believe, especially after the successful launch press conference we had Wednesday, that's yesterday, okay, that we can get this enacted in 2018. But even if we don't, we can make it an issue, like as we've done in previous campaigns, and pass it in 2019. So that's the background. I'll let Jamie to talk more about what the campaign's about, and we'll answer questions.
Thanks. Yeah, to back up for a moment, the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative, as you heard the video say, is working to pass legislation in Maryland that will expand renewable electricity to 50% by 2030. The current law is 25% by 2020, and we want to double that. It will invest millions of dollars into job training programs for Maryland residents, giving people access to the booming number of jobs installing solar panels on rooftops and building wind turbines. And it will provide investments and loans and funds for clean energy businesses that are owned by women and people of color to make sure that the economy that we're building, the clean energy economy, is an economy that everybody gets to be a part of. And the 4th thing is that we will be removing trash incineration as one of the sources of renewable energy. So that's like the legislative package that we are trying to advance. And it's bold, and it's really powerful to work on a package like that. A few years ago, I was working at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I was working for Brooke. She was my direct supervisor, taught me everything I know besides what Vinny has taught me. We were then working on the 25% by 2020 campaign. And when that legislation was first introduced in the Maryland legislature in 2015 legislative session, it failed horribly in committee. And it failed largely because then State Senator Pugh, she's now obviously the mayor of Baltimore, but when she was a state senator, she voted against the legislation. And she said when the Chesapeake Climate Action Network asked her why she voted against it, she said, listen, I don't see how your legislation helps the people who I represent, and I don't see people who look like me represented at your events. And to their great credit, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network took that feedback to heart, and they did two things. The first is they started drafting legislative language that they had never worked with before. This is when the ideas of creating loans and investments in women and minority-owned businesses first started coming into play, and when the idea of creating job training programs first is something we started talking about. And the second thing we did was to do deep relationship building and movement building in Senator Pugh's district in West Baltimore. That was what mostly my job was going neighborhood association to neighborhood association, sometimes door to door. You'd be a half a dozen concerned citizens sitting around a gym table on a Tuesday night, and you say give me your pitch, who thinks that we should make this change for our state and for our city and for our climate. And some community associations said they had more important things to do. But some community associations said, absolutely, I don't want another kid going to school with asthma. My son needs a job, put us on, sign us up. We're vigorously in favor of this. And we got 11 community associations to formally endorse the 25% by 2020 campaign. And we had community association members, Brooke and I were in this meeting together with Senator Pugh, with a community association leader who was across the table from Senator Pugh, saying this matters so much, you absolutely have to pass this legislation, please, please, please. We held a big event in her district. Over 100 people, most of whom were from that district, showed up in support of this legislation. And what happened was Senator Pugh went from opposing the 25% by 2020 bill to being a lead sponsor of that same bill with added provisions when it was introduced in the 2016 legislative session. And that's the kind of power that grassroots mobilizations, group like this, who can get resolutions signed, coupled with a powerful legislative package like the multiple goals that we're advancing, can do. It can transform an environment from a bill failing miserably in a committee vote to a bill that has a veto-proof majority and gets enacted into law. And that's a lot of what inspires me to work on this and gets me excited about working on this. 50% renewable electricity is the goal that we're working towards in this legislation. A part of the campaign is embracing language around 100% renewable electricity, and we all know that's the ultimate goal and where we're getting to, and we see this as a stepping stone towards that goal. And as the federal government is pulling back from its responsibility, a few years ago, national carbon tax might have been, that was my dream. I was part of the Citizens Climate Lobby, we're just gonna get a national carbon tax at the federal level and none of the state work is gonna matter. And now we're 3.5 years out from ever possibly having, at the edge of a possibility of getting a national price on carbon. And strong state policies like these are our primary vehicle as citizens right now in this country to address the existential threat of climate change. And we think the model calls for a 2-year campaign. We think there's an outside chance this could get past this legislative session. We want to pass this in 2018. The combination of the backlash to Trump walking backwards on climate, combined with the growing evidence, visceral evidence that a changing climate is here with us today and here to stay, as we see multiple 500-year storms a single week hitting our country, there's real energy to pass legislation like this in Maryland. I think that's what I have to say about this.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Questions? We start Ted and Barb. And then Ann.
The legislation that, say, puts forward that, yes, we want to have 50% electric energy by 2030. On top of that, are there incentives then for people to do that are state incentives, financial incentives?
Yes.
Is that part of this legislation?
Let me add that Brooke is here to talk about
Sorry.
the Potomac pipeline, but she is by far my expertise of the legislation.
He knows.
So right now, we just, on Monday, right in the nick of time, we just have been working for months with the solar and wind industry to get them to come to the table to see what is that new tier 1 chart going to look like. And so currently, we are at a 2.5% solar carve out. That was what was implemented in our 2016 legislation. And the solar industry is, as our solar prices are dropping, our solar rec prices are dropping, and we are a victim of our own success here in Maryland with the solar industry. So what they are asking for is an additional 14.5% carve out, which would support and retain over 20,000 jobs in the solar industry in Maryland. And by taking up so much more room in that I always look at it as like a pie chart. So they're getting a significant more piece of that pie. So we're not only doubling solar, we're toppling or whatever the heck we call it. It'll be 7 times more solar in Maryland. So that solar carve out will build incentives and it will build demand. And the RPS, you won't get a tax incentive for that. But what it does is it builds up that demand and makes it's a mandate on utility companies to source 14.5% of the electricity that they supply you to 14.5% by 2030. And that's all in-state solar. In addition to that solar carve out, one of the things we're always mindful of when we're passing legislation, and if y'all remember in 2016 when Governor Hogan vetoed it, he said, and had the big billboards that said, these senators voted to raise your utility rates and all of those things. One of the things we were very cautious of is keeping that ratepayer impact below $2 per month, per household. And at the peak, and the solar and the wind industry worked very diligently with us. Just as Vinny takes away my guns and my cigarettes and my beer, I'm very diligent about not taking your money. So we were really stern in saying it has to be under this $2 cap. And so there'll be an additional carve out for offshore wind in addition to what the carve out is now. And so that builds more demand and incentive for wind and solar. Another thing, by removing the trash incineration out, we're no longer subsidizing it. So that means that we're not having those recs on the market. So that makes even more room for wind and solar as well, and for more renewable energy to come on board and for us to invest in that rather than trash incineration.
I think you've answered most of my question there, but so if I understand right, if the bill passes, then the electric companies themselves will have a mandate to encourage people to use renewable energy. And I'm thinking their homeowners and individuals can do that. I've recently moved to an apartment complex, and I wonder, would the whole apartment complex, is there something I could do to get them to go solar?
No, it's not about putting, y'all done a wonderful job, put solar out there, so it's beautiful. So it's not your own, it's not that you're gonna put solar on your roof and we're gonna require you to put solar on your roof or to use. This is a mandate on utility companies of where they source their energy from. So the amount of electricity so you don't have to do darn things to pay your utility bill. And sign the resolution and advocate. So it's a mandate on the utility companies. So the electricity that you get will come from renewable energy sources. If they don't come from renewable energy sources, then the utility companies have to pay what they call an alternative compliance payment fee. And in order that we're not burdening low-income communities as we're expanding clean energy, our clean energy economy, one of the things that the solar and wind industry agreed to do was to dramatically lower those alternative compliance payment fees. So usually, let's say the alternative compliance payment fee is $7, okay? So, and your SREC is worth $5. So utility company, your solar credit's worth $5. So the utility company is naturally gonna say, hey, we're gonna use the solar energy for $5 instead of paying the $2 penalty. But in order to make sure that your bills aren't going up as we're bringing on more renewable energy, one of the things we're doing is we're lowering that to about $6. So even if your company doesn't, even if your utility company doesn't purchase those RECs, those fees that they would have to pay if they're passed on to you won't increase your bill that dramatically.
Yes, a lot of the current jobs in the fossil fuel industry and the electric plants that use fossil fuel are run by white males. So why aren't they included in the provision to invest in businesses for creating renewable power and retraining? So it doesn't seem fair to put them out of jobs and then not offer some way that they can make themselves fit into this new renewable economy.
So we're not excluding white males, but one of the things that we've seen with the cost of fossil fuel is that it is normally low income in communities of color that have borne the cost. And so while we pay in about $1 billion into the energy economy, we only reap about 0.1% of the actual economic benefit. And if you look at communities like Curtis Bay that are overburdened by dirty industry, one of the things that we want to do in Maryland is, as we're growing our solar industry, as we're growing the renewable energy economy, we don't want to grow economic inequality. And so that's why we're setting aside those incentives so that we're making sure that all of the right folks are at the table. We're not excluding people, but we are making sure that this legislation uplifts the communities that have paid for our dirty energy the most. And we're finding that with women and minority-owned businesses, especially in minority communities, they're the ones that have paid the highest cost with our dirty energy. And so it's not to exclude anybody from the table, it's to make sure that that table is diverse.
And in addition, the main way that those folks you're talking about would be helpful would be by the retraining, which they'd be very much eligible.
There's two separate line items. The first is like loans and investments in women and minority-owned businesses. The second is job training programs, and that's going to be targeted at economically distressed parts of the state.
Where their jobs are closed because of fossil fuel plants closing out. So those folks would get these resources.
They would.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not clear in some of these statements.
All right, well, thank you. We've got to make that more clear.
Because last time at the hearings, I recall lots of these big burly white men coming in with their hard hats and everything, testifying against some of the bills because they would lose their jobs.
Yeah,
So
it's an excellent point, and one of the things we're doing, and Brooke is taking lead on this, is talking with this a lot with the AFL-CIO, the unions, the construction unions, and the steel workers unions, to make sure they're okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we hear that loud and clear.
And one of the things we do want to open up for unions, and my background is in labor, and so I do see that, and I do see the concern about what a just transition is going to look like. And I was on the other side and was on with those burly white men testifying against y'all not too long ago, because they see like some of our policies could cause a ripple effect, and they're scared of that. And one of the things that we do want to do is build a bridge between labor and environment. So when we talk about workforce development, one of the things that we want to do is to ensure that like labor has been a boon to our country. It's why we have 9 to 5. Fair wages and all of those things that we're seeing eroded. And so we know that in order to build a strong clean energy economy, labor has to be a part of that. It doesn't do us any good if we have solar workers making $9 an hour or not having, fair working conditions and things like that. So we're trying to, as we develop workforce development funding, to set aside a portion of that funding to support registered trade apprenticeship programs, which are mostly union programs and union workforce development programs. So we do want to set aside and allocate a portion of those funds to union apprenticeships Also, while opening up doors, a lot of union apprenticeships are, for instance, returning citizens from being able to be a part of that. So we don't want to lose that gap either. And so we'll fund both, but we do want to make sure that a certain portion of that workforce development funding is going to registered trade apprenticeships.
Real quick, as we keep taking questions, and I want to make sure everyone gets their questions asked, I am going to be working very hard to get a lot of these resolutions signed. And if anyone is interested on helping me, I'm going to be having sort of like business canvases where we spend a few hours knocking on doors in key districts of small businesses and asking them to sign the resolution. So I'm just going to pass these out, and if you see a date and a time when you would like to come and join, go ahead and put your name down and pass these around as we keep taking questions.
Are they all the same?
They're all the same, so I'll just collect them at the end. And
Does anybody not have a packet? Anybody need a packet?
Can I get one?
So I saw Coley's hand and Cindy.
Okay, so I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby. We still have hope that things will change.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to drag. I love CCL. I love CCL.
So my question is, why a regulatory approach and not the carbon fee and rebate approach that you guys are working on in DC?
Do you think this is the best way forward for Maryland right now?
Can you say more about why?
Because this is what Vinny and Mike told me to do. So, I'm sorry. No, we don't, like, I think there are legislators that are interested in a cap and trade program and, you know, a carbon tax, but we've seen this as the best way to bring about a clean energy economy, and we really, I feel like we left the job undone with the 25%, and a lot of, we really want to make sure that we're uplifting all communities, and this is the reason why we selected this bill was because my predecessor, James McGarry, is brilliant young man, and he was looking at the cost of wind and solar, looking at the market, and was like, you know what, we could actually get to 50% with little to no impact to ratepayers. And when we saw that opportunity, we felt the need to seize that opportunity and work on this legislation.
The other thing I'll say is that I've been talking with Climate Exchange, which is like
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
And the bill, I'd like to talk to them, and the bill that they are going to put forward is going to be very compatible with this bill, because the bill that they're thinking about, and like the stages they're thinking about, is not going to include utilities. This is 50% electricity. It's only utilities. It's not including what powers the fire on your stove, what heats your water if you have a gas water heater, what powers your car. So if Climate Exchange is putting forward a cap and trade program at the state level, it'll be covering everything we're not covering and not covering what we are covering. If that makes sense.
I'm very glad you're in touch with them. I was just texting them asking if they'd met.
Okay, St. John and then Will.
The Petroleum Institute loves to put lots of ads on television about how economical their product is and how many jobs it will provide. But the renewable energy is actually considerably less expensive than going with solar or even going with petroleum products or nuclear. And I did a study recently on the cost of a gas-fired power plant versus solar-powered power plant. And they're almost identical as far as cost per watt output. But over 30 years, it costs 19 times as much as the cost to build for the gas-fired power plant to power for 30 years, and nothing for the solar plant. So, you know, that's an enormous difference. If you say you spend $1 billion on a 1 gigawatt plant, and then you're going to spend $19 billion at today's rates for gas to supply that thing for 30 years, it's ridiculous. And the sun's going to be around for another at least 5 billion years, so that's good. The other thing too, though, is that the petroleum, you know, carbon people anyway say, well, if you use solar or wind, you've only got power when the sun's up or when the wind's blowing. But that's wrong too. In fact, that was taken into account in my calculations for the power plant, that you'd have to have take excess power when you have it, generate ammonia with it, store it in tanks, and then when the wind is gone or the sun's down, then you convert the ammonia back to electricity through fuel cells. And Toyota and Honda both make very good fuel cells for that. So and they're running over 90% efficient, so that's very good. And
Yeah.
so there's no problem with that. And so that's really bad information from the carbon people. That you do have 24/7 power with renewables if you plan the system right. And then the other thing too is, let's say, well, if you need these huge areas for the solar panels, that just, it's too much land, you can't get all that together. Well, I did a little research on how many shopping centers we have in the country. And it turns out that between the shopping center buildings and the parking lots for these, it's over 8,000 square miles. And all of these could be covered with solar panels. And to show, how it's done, you either go to the Maryland Environmental Services building at the end of Benfield Road, and they've got their roof, their parking lot, and their backyard completely covered with solar panels. Go to Rutgers University, they've got their parking lots completely covered. Anne Arundel Community College, parking lots covered with solar panels. And so here's area that's not being used for anything except for parking cars or having a building there. And that can be covered up with solar panels, and you got,
It keeps your car cool.
The what?
It keeps your car cool too.
Yes, right, very good, it keeps snow off it in the
And you
winter.
put rain barrels,
Yes.
catch the rainwater coming off.
So anyway, the bottom line here is that more information needs to be put out saying that the cost of renewable energy is really considerably less than it is for carbon and nuclear. On the nuclear side, well, the power plants cost anywhere from 5 to 10 times as much as gas-fired or a solar power plant per watt output for a nuclear power plant. And you've got the radioactive problem, the waste, the other problems in building and maintaining the power plant. And it turns out since 1954 that the U.S. government has subsidized the nuclear power industry in this country to the tune of $2 trillion. And they still can't make it. If you take away their subsidies, it collapse. So,
Good points.
Can I call you sometimes?
Sure.
If someone's making a point and I can say, excuse me, I'm an expert on this.
Pass your card to Jamie. Well, Jamie knows all of this. He's a very good and quick respondent, quick respondent. So you know most of what I'm going to say. I don't know exactly what you're going to say. But one of the things that strikes me in the presentation that you've been given is you're not worried, from the presentation you've been given, you're not worried about climate change. You're worried about clean energy and getting rid of chicken litter and some other stuff of that sort. You're going to a 50% clean, and that still leaves us with 50% fossil if it all goes fossil, which is what we're at already. So by 2030, if your law goes through and if everything goes wrong, we'd be just about exactly where we are today. So and in your 6-step process, I think a fundamental mistake was made in the survey, and it wasn't. I won't mention. It wasn't your organisation, as it happens. People can look up who it was. Never mind. I don't have to say. But it was a fundamental and small mistake because they asked people, how do you feel about clean energy? How do you feel about clean energy? And they didn't ask, how do you feel about getting off fossil fuel? If they'd asked, how do you feel about getting off fossil fuels? I think that from step 1 to step 6 would have been quite different. And
actually, our polling actually did ask that. As Trump, we did commissioned a study, CCAN commissioned polling with OpinionWorks. And so the first thing they asked was, how do you feel about a 50%, bringing Maryland to 50% renewable energy? And one of the questions that was included in that survey was, as Trump pushes more coal and more fossil fuels, does that make you more or less likely to support? And as the 6-step process to take my cigarettes away outlines, one of the things was to get a very specific and to get a good poll. So we spent a considerable amount of money to get a really good poll that asked direct questions. Like, the first question was, how do you feel about this initiative? And then it went even deeper and said, if it has a ratepayer impact. And then it went even deeper and said, and it just, I'm happy to send you the polling, but it did ask about climate change and how important of an electoral issue that was. And I think it's actually linked if you go to the CCAN page.
I've sent
the polls linked, but they were specific questions that led, and I think we're all doing this because we don't want to see climate change. We don't want to see I don't want a Hurricane Harvey. I don't want a Hurricane Irma. I think that's why we're all here doing the work that we do. But if we can uplift communities, why not do that while we're addressing climate change? And I think 50%, we all know that Governor Hogan vetoed our last bill. Our goal is to get to 100% renewable energy in Maryland. But we also have to look at some of the hard political realities and realize that this is a really critical benchmark. If you looked at our Washington Post article, we had both the leaders of the committee saying, the ink is barely dry on the last bill, or we're in an election year, and we have people that are vulnerable candidates, and and we have to be the messengers, and you have to be a messenger that says, we know that you might lose a couple of seats, but what about how many lives that we're gonna lose? And what about how many cities are gonna be underwater? And I think that climate change is at the forefront of everything that we do. It's why CCAN was formed. It's why Jamie works on this, and it's why we're all here. And I don't think that, our campaign is to address the growing threat of climate change.
I think if you'd listened to the presentation today, you would be surprised at how much it was about clean energy and how little it was about climate change. It was in parentheses, and of course, and I'm sure that you take it so much for granted, but it isn't what you're saying to the general public as a listener.
Well, you heard that was what the message was in the video. It was about climate. But I mean, that's we use that video to set that up.
And we appreciate that feedback. Hearing that, like, as a listener, that's not coming across clear enough.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The U.S. really should be very embarrassed because, not making much progress on renewable energy. Pakistan several years ago said that they were going to be completely off with anything but renewable energy by 2020, and they're doing it.
Really?
So that in about 2.5 years, they'll be 100% renewable.
I did not know.
And there are 14 other countries that are 100% right now. So,
wow.
Including
So
Norway.
you said
and
14
Iceland.
other countries that are 100%.
Yeah, like Norway, Iceland, that don't use any fossil fuels.
Get that card that you.
Yes, Scott. In terms of public health issues, I'm aware that for lung disease, that this area is pretty good in terms of particulates, but it's bad in terms of ozone. And I just wondered, I don't know the science of ozone enough to know how all this ties into that, but it seems like it might be a pretty good argument because ozone makes airways constrict in people with asthma and emphysema. And so I was thinking that if there was some data saying if we do this, then you'll have this much reduction in ozone, which will get everybody healthier, then that might be a good argument. So, but I don't know enough past what I just said.
So there is some in your fact sheet. We did use it's called like the BERT tool, so we can see what would be. We all have you don't just do the fact sheet.
Not the pretty fact sheet, but they
do not do the pretty fact sheet. Okay. So in the pretty fact sheet that I have, we did use a BERT modeling to see like what would be the overall health impacts and you can do like future forecast modeling. And so one of the things that we found is that it would save, taking out incineration or reduce like 1.8 fatal heart attacks a year. And the bill overall, I think it would prevent about 3,000 asthma attacks and 290 deaths annually. Due to air pollution. And so we can look into, I have a chart I can send you of just like the specific breakdown of all of the emissions, including the particulate matter. I just thought it was a little too wonky to include in the fact sheet, but I'm happy to send that to you if you'd like, so you can have that information and look at how it actually would dramatically bring that down.
Renewable energy saves lives and creates jobs. There you go.
450.
Carl.
So, Brooke, I was happy to hear that DNR had studied some of the issues with the pipeline and that MDE is looking at it, because it seems to me that it's an option for them just to decline to even to look at it. So the more that you can get that information to us, since we really haven't heard much about what's going on within the MDE, although it sounds like it's not a lot yet, it would be really helpful. I mean, I have a very hard time telling the governor to tell MDE what to do. I mean, that's what we're telling them not to do in all the other circumstances. And it's not, unlike what Will is saying, it's really not a political decision. It's not an economic decision. It's a science decision that MDE should be making. So I have a hard time telling Governor Hogan, tell MDE what to do. So the more information we can get out on what the science really is and what they're doing, so that we can frame our letters to people like Governor Hogan, would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy. You can use our fact sheet. Go to Potomac River Keepers. They have a wealth of information. I am not an expert in karst geology and all of those things, but we have not had, since our initial meeting with Grumbles, we've not had a response at all. We did see like a small blip in the Post article that said we will hold a public meeting. But we've sent all of our research, like Potomac River Keepers, sent in a really detailed letter looking at all of the things that they should look at. For instance, the 8 streams that it crosses over, what are the air impacts, what would happen if there was an incident, and basically TransCanada response to, they took a really detailed look at what would they do if a leak or something happened while they were drilling. And their response was, we're going to turn off the pipeline and we'll get some buckets and some bulldozers. And that's how detailed they were. And so I'm happy to send you like the DNR report where they can look at the different things. You are a wonky guy if that's what you do for fun. But I don't even do that for fun. But so and look at the different issues, and I'll also send you our letter that we sent to Grumbles so you can see some of the concerns that we've raised as a I don't know what we are. We're not a coalition. We're the groups that work on the pipeline. But and that'll help kind of you if you want to craft it. But so far we haven't. This is our 3rd letter. We're like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. It'd be great if you could actually respond to us and let us know what you're thinking. But I was really surprised about they hadn't read the report yet, and they hadn't really looked into it, didn't know how long the pipeline was, So.
Do you have a follow-up question, Carl?
No, but I have another question.
Okay, so Carl and then Will.
So the other thing we've heard recently for the Maryland Clean Jobs, the Clean Energy Jobs Initiative is we're also hearing now that from Food and Water Watch and their recent press conference about the OFF Act and trying to also legislate 100% clean energy by 2035 and 80 by 2027. So I just wanted to get kind of your response to that and how that fits into your campaign, or if we're looking at both, what your reaction to that is.
So it is our goal. Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Initiative works alongside the Maryland Climate Coalition. And our goal, the reason why we were formed, aside from all the different environmental organizations, funding the St. John Creek Foundation for funds, was so we could get on a roadmap to 100% renewable energy. And we think Food and Water Watch's campaign and Delegate Robinson's bill are very ambitious, and they are where we want to go. We want to get to 100% renewable energy. We just disagree on the vehicles to get there. But ultimately, we need to build a movement of all of us for renewable energy. So we don't want to look at this as putting people into camps. We have some serious concerns with the vehicle that they're using. They want to do it through long-term power purchase agreements. which would, and, you know, what impact does that have on the wind industry that was, you know, the utilities were vehemently opposed, and that's why we had so much opposition to offshore wind, because utility companies didn't want to be locked in, and we have offshore wind incentivized through the ORAC. And we've seen the RPS be a positive vehicle across the nation, and Food and Water Watches, we haven't seen their bill language, but we know that the RPS would not be the vehicle that they would use, and so it would be a repeal of the RPS. And so many Marylanders and so many legislators have worked so hard. I mean, this has been since 2010 that we've been working on RPS bills, and we think this is a proven vehicle to get us there. We think this is the most politically viable step that we can get on the roadmap to 100%. And that 50% is a critical benchmark, but we don't denigrate their efforts. We think they're bold and visionary, and I think we all can agree as an environmental community that our ultimate goal is 100% renewable energy, but we just differ on the ways that we're going to get there, and we don't want to see a repeal of the RPS and don't want to see the wind industry be at stake because they've chosen a different vehicle through the long-term PPAs.
And the one thing I'll add on is that I think it was in the 2000s when the first landmark renewable portfolio standard was passed in Maryland, and it set, at the time, a bold vision for, yeah, it was 7.5% by 2019.
Oh.
I think.
Look at us now.
Yeah, so at the time, it was like early 2000s, they passed the law 7.5% by 2019. And then after that law was passed, we came back and we revised the renewable portfolio standard. We revised that over and over and over till today we're at 25% by 2020. And if back in the early 2000s you had gone to Maryland legislators and said, hey, let's do 25% by 2020, the people in this room would have known that was possible, but most of Maryland wouldn't. And it took pulling these lawmakers inch by inch along to get to 25% by 2020. And we think similarly we're going to get to 100% in the time frame Food and Watch is putting out. But first we need to pass 50%.
Okay, so Will, Carol.
I just have such a quick question
Okay.
related to that.
Quickly.
What is our current RPS at? Not our goal, but our current.
From the 2015 last data, I believe we were at 7%.
What's RPS?
Renewable portfolio standard, a really wonky way of saying how much renewable energy is in your electricity.
Can you say how much it's now?
7.
7 or 17?
7.
Is that all?
Okay, good. Will, Carol.
You mentioned the health issue and asthma and all of those sorts of difficulties. I in no way understand why we have not gone back to the O'Malley NOx regulations. It's simple as anything. That was going to close down 4 coal plants, 2 of them in Baltimore. And all that happened was that Hogan came in and put in a fourth option, which allowed those plants to stay open. And in fact, when he came in, the law was that the O'Malley regulations, that he stopped them being implemented. And it seems to me, I simply don't understand. We'll stop.
We'd love to see the NOx regulations restored, I think.
But do you think that you've got a 6-step process in this? It's well underway. How long, or how does one go about getting this done? Because I was told 2 years ago when I was proposing it that it wasn't on the agenda. Baltimore, the Maryland Climate Coalition was not on their priorities, and we should forget about it. Oh, and Bush didn't want it.
Worth looking into.
Well, I guess.
All right.
Another thing, sorry.
Carol.
on 100%, everybody's in agreement, that is the goal, that's what you said, but different ways. I want to know what is the date of the 100% goal?
2035. And
35?
for Food and Water Watch, the bill that they are launching and the bill that Delegate Robinson will be putting forward is by the year 2035. The Maryland Climate Coalition, we think it's, I forget the name of the organization and I apologize. We've published a study about the roadmap to 100% renewable energy. We need to look at that and look at some of the different aspects of that, like what would be the ratepayer impact, what would be the just transition, and that's going to take us some time. And so right now we don't have like the set date. Like we're still looking at how do we get there. And right now we're looking at this as one of the avenues that we get to 100%, but we don't have a timeline where we're saying by 2026 we're going to be at 100% renewable energy, but we are committed to doing that, and we are doing the research, and that's part of this process right now, because we know that you all are going to ask us, when are you going to get to 100% and how are we going to do it? And so that's something that we, as a coalition have been looking at and want to undertake as well, and are actively undertaking it while we're doing this 50% campaign. But I don't have a definitive date, I'm sorry.
Okay, Sinjin, and then we take one more question if there is one, and then wrap up. I think I'm feeling a sense of closure here. Okay, Sinjin, and then if anybody else has a question.
Yeah, an aspect of alternative energy to consider is the fact that when you're using solar or wind, one of the things you have to do is either have a big battery or you make ammonia. In this country, we use 200 million barrels a year of ammonia for fertilizer. And it's all brought in from the Middle East or from Trinidad. And all of that ammonia is made from natural gas, which is terrible. All it does is add to the carbon dioxide problem. But if you're generating ammonia using solar and wind, then that can be used then either for making more electricity or sell it to the farmers for fertilizing the fields. So there's a ready market, at least for 200 million barrels right there for any power plant that's producing solar or wind.
Good enough.
So.
Okay, so I'm going to take two more. Say Reese and then Ted.
What's ammonium?
Ammonia, that's a compound NH3.
But can you quickly say how it's used in a process to store energy?
Yes, it can be used for storing energy. And if you're very sleepy, it'll wake you up. Sniff it.
And how is it used to create energy then once you've stored it?
You put it through a fuel cell, which converts the hydrogen that's in the ammonia into water and produces electricity.
And I would say Sinjin is a fountain of information about ammonia, so.
Somebody has to.
Additional questions, Reese. See him. Ted.
So if I'm understanding you correct, we're at 7% now of renewable energy.
I don't know that was our latest report that we had.
And we're trying to get 25% in
2020. So it gradually ramps up each year. But I think the last report was dated in 2015. So we don't have our 2016 and 2017 numbers yet.
This legislation is really to put the squeeze on the energy companies to figure out a way to find renewable energy sources. And the suggestion of putting them on all the malls is a great idea. Because right now, if they wanted to be at 50%, would there even be enough renewable energy sources for them to be able to do that?
There would be. We need to, one of the things we need to do at the county level, and that we're seeing a lot of, is a lot of siting problems. So for instance, you have the Harris Amendment with offshore wind that was introduced that could put those projects in jeopardy. I know when I go home, all I see is signs that say "Stop this here false solar farm." So I think it's up to all of us to be vigilant at the county and the state, as well as the federal government, this one, to make sure that we are building opportunities and not blocking those opportunities to have solar brought online. And not all the solar that's produced has to be produced in Maryland, like the solar RECs that like companies buy that solar has to be produced in Maryland with the solar carve out. But let's say a company, we don't have enough wind power in Maryland right now to power all of Maryland. A utility company can purchase wind credits from other states within our PJM grid. So like we're part of RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So they can like buy and sell RECs and do trading on that. So even if we're not getting it, they're still paying a penalty. They have to buy like from other sources. So like let's say you have solar on your roof. So you get a rebate, you get checks for solar. So that comes from those companies buying those credits from you and making sure that we're producing more renewable energy in Maryland.
Just a follow-up question on it. If the legislation is built towards a specific year, a certain percentage, and not graduated, it would seem to me if I'm the energy company, I don't worry about this till, very late in night.
No, you worry about it because each year, each year you have a rate that you need to be at, and you also have a fee that you need to pay. So what we do is we say, as you're ramping it up, we're gonna bring the fees down so that it becomes normalized and but we know in the beginning that they're gonna need some incentives to change the way that they do business. And so you'll basically see like as solar goes up and as wind goes up, that those alternative compliance payment fees come down and it's the norm. So each year they have a benchmark they have to meet, and if they don't meet it, then they have to pay a penalty. And that penalty goes into what we call RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and then we can use those funds then those go into a fund called the Strategic Energy Investment Fund that we want to use to fund programs like the workforce development and grant programs for minority-owned businesses and things like Empower and all of the energy efficiency vehicles that we have in Maryland.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just have an announcement.
An announcement. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up. I want to thank presenters. Thank you very much.
May I make one request? Can I see who in this room is ready to take this resolution to some organization? There you go. Where are you going to take it? I like that. I like it. All right. And Jamie will get your information. Anybody else going to take it?
So we'll be talking about it in Climate Stewards.
Great. And someone's going to take it to this meeting?
We've already. Sure.
Climate Stewards. Yeah, we signed on while you were in my
Also want to thank everybody who asked a question and everybody who paid close attention. Thanks, Carl, for the tech support, as always.
Thank you.
I have a couple of announcements too on upcoming events. We have a business meeting of the Climate Stewards, and that's where we make decisions about endorsements or policy positions. That's going to be on Thursday, September 28th, so a couple of weeks out. But tomorrow, we're going to have an ad hoc group meeting to sort of do some spade work for the business meeting in terms of looking at proposals of Food and Water Watch. They also, of course, requested support. And we want to take a look at the, what's the name of the bill at national legislation called?
The Climate Exchange?
The representative from Hawaii.
Well, that's all fossil fuels.
All fossil fuels. So anyway, that meeting is going to be here in the library tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you want to be part of a policy discussion, clarifying, bringing ideas to the business meeting later in the month, you can join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. And lastly, the movie night is Friday, September 22nd, right in this room. It's featuring a showing and discussion of the award-winning movie Chasing Ice. So that'll be shown on Friday, the 22nd. Coley, another?
Yes, so looking forward to October, there's two events that some of us in this room are part of organizing. So this is a save the date. For Saturday, October 21st, a loose coalition of grassroots groups like Indivisibles and Women's Huddles are putting together something called EARTH, which stands for Environmental Activist Response Town Hall. And it's a statewide gathering of new progressive activists and existing environmental groups. So we have people from the Climate Coalition and other groups who will be coming to talk, as well as legislators from the state capitol. So that's a Saturday afternoon from 2 to 5, probably at Annapolis High School. And there will be opportunities for groups to set up tables there. So it would be a great opportunity for networking. Because this is people who want to get out and do something and they don't know what to do yet. The other thing is October 25th. What are we calling it?
Annapolis Candidates Environmental Forum. So this will be an opportunity to meet the mayoral candidates and to hear them answer questions, some of which we are preparing, some of which will be generated by the audience that evening. But we're also inviting all of the candidates for the 8 ward contests in Annapolis to be there and to talk with people. We'll have roundtable discussions for that part of the event. So that's a Wednesday, the 25th at 7 o'clock, and it'll be at the Knesset Israel Synagogue near Spa Road and Hilltop. Everybody's welcome, and I think those of you who don't live in Annapolis realize that you have a stake in this election, that the response, for example, of the city to sea level rise is going to affect property values, could affect property values, not only in Annapolis, but in Anne Arundel County in general. So please join us. We'd like to have a good turnout.